Hey everybody, so today I want to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning, why I think they are legitimate Stanley Cup contenders this season, and more specifically, why I think the Lightning are actually better suited to win the Stanley Cup this season than they were last year when they were the best team in the league. So before we get into the video, I want to quickly remind everyone to please hit that like button and give this video a thumbs up. That really does help out a lot and is very much appreciated. And if you are new to the channel, to please hit that subscribe button and follow along for all my hockey content this season and all year round. So when you look at the Eastern Conference right now, I think there are three teams that are standing out as the top three teams in the East. The Washington Capitals, the Boston Bruins, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. So those, I think, are your top three, probably your top three contenders from the Eastern Conference right now. There's a team in the Tampa Bay Lightning sitting in second place in the Atlantic Division right now, 8 points behind Boston, who I think is very much a dark horse candidate, if you want to call them that, to win the Stanley Cup this year. And I think are a very, very legit Stanley Cup contender this season. And I honestly think that the Lightning are better suited to win the Stanley Cup this year, have a better chance of winning the Stanley Cup this year than they actually did last year when they went into the playoffs as the number one seed and were, the President's Trophy winning dominant, top team that they were all season long. And let me explain that more fully here and why I believe that. So last season, the Tampa Bay Lightning won 62 games. They tied the NHL record for wins in a season. They won the President's Trophy. They were the best team in the league all year long. They won 62 out of 82 games. Just think about that. That is insanely good. But the problem with that for Tampa Bay was they never faced any adversity all season long. They never struggled at any point last season. They were dominant from the opening faceoff of the season through the end of the regular season. They were absolutely dominant. I don't think they ever lost more than 2 or 3 games in a row at any point last year. They never at all during the season did you go, wow, the Lightning are really struggling this week. No, they blew through everybody, and the regular season was an absolute cakewalk for them. And they didn't even have to really try. They just had to show up. The Lightning would just show up and win the game. And they had so much talent, so much scoring, and they were just so good that they were just kind of out there going through the motions, and they could blow through almost any opponent that they faced. And everything just came so easily for them in the regular season. But then we got to the playoffs. We got to playoff time, and all of a sudden everything changed. The compete level ramped up, the intensity ramped up, the battle factor needed to win ramped up, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, just switched from regular season to postseason. But all of a sudden, just showing up wasn't good anymore. You couldn't just be there and win the game. And the Lightning found that out the hard way, and they found that out very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, this cocky, dominant team that was absolutely blowing through the league wasn't so high and mighty anymore. And that cockiness caught up to them, and they had their confidence completely shattered by Columbus. And Columbus was a team that barely made the playoffs. Columbus had to scratch and claw and battle their way into the postseason. They had been battling for months just to get into the playoffs. So when it did come to playoff time and everything ramped up, the physicality, the compete level, the battle factor, everything ramped up in the playoffs, Columbus was ready because they had been playing like that for the past 2 months just to get into the playoffs. Tampa wasn't ready because they didn't have to play that way at all during the regular season. It wasn't a cakewalk anymore, and they were not ready for it not to be a cakewalk. And they got completely caught off guard. They got their confidence completely shattered, especially after losing the first 2 games at home. They were absolutely shell-shocked. I mean, you look at that team. They dropped both games 1 and 2 on home ice. They went to Columbus for games 3 and 4, and they were like, what do? We haven't had to deal with anything like this all year. What do we do? And their confidence was destroyed. The team was in utter shock, and they completely crumbled. The Tampa Bay Lightning completely crumbled in the playoffs last year because they had it so easy in the regular season, because they never faced any adversity, because they never struggled. They didn't know how to deal with it when things didn't go their way. This year's Tampa Bay Lightning team got off to a very slow start, struggled a lot at the start of the season. The first 2 months, they were not in a playoff spot for a majority of the first 2 months of the season. And they were facing adversity, and there was a lot of talk about, oh no, what's going on with Tampa Bay? Are they still struggling because of that playoff loss last year? This team has faced struggles this year, and now over the past 6 weeks or so, they have really, really ramped it up. And look like the Tampa Bay Lightning of old now, and they've crawled all the way from out of a playoff spot, pretty significantly out of a playoff spot, into second place in the Atlantic Division. They've overcome that adversity, which they never did last year. They've struggled and pulled themselves out of those struggles, which they never did last year. And now I think they have learned how to overcome things like that, how to battle, how to go into a game knowing that you're going to have to scratch and claw to win, knowing that not every night is going to be a cakewalk, and it's not going to be easy to go in and win at the NHL level. And I think this year's Tampa Bay team is much, much, much more likely to make a deep playoff run than last year's team ever was. Because last year's team, quite frankly, had it way too easy all season long, and they were not ready to battle come playoff time. This year's Tampa team has been battling from the get-go. They've had to battle their way all the way back up the standings from being well out of the playoffs into a playoff spot, now to a point where they could potentially still compete for the division win against Boston. In that kind of adversity that they've overcome, that kind of struggle that they've had, and that kind of effort they've had to put in, and battle that they've had to put in to climb the standings, is going to pay dividends come playoff time. I think this team this year is going to know how to go into the playoffs and win. I think they're gonna know the kind of effort and intensity level they're gonna need to bring. And they're going to, I think, be a lot better in the playoffs this year than they were last season. And I think the Lightning are a very legitimate Stanley Cup threat. I think they could, definitely go to the conference final or even further to win the Cup. And I think they're ready now to give those top other teams in the East, like Washington, Boston, and Pittsburgh, a run for their money. And then possibly, we don't know who they'd face in the finals, but you look at the top teams out in the West, like St. Louis and Colorado, Vancouver, Dallas, Edmonton, Calgary. Those teams, Tampa is going to be ready to play any of them as well. So I really do think, even though Tampa has not nearly been as good this season in the regular season as they were last year, I think they are much better suited for a playoff run. I think they are much stronger of a Stanley Cup candidate this year, and I think they're a very real threat to go to the Eastern Conference Final, Stanley Cup Final, and maybe even win the Stanley Cup. And it's because they haven't had it so easy. They haven't had a cakewalk of a regular season. I think that is preparing them much better for the playoffs than last year's regular season did for that team. So that's my opinion. With that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.